I'm a little bit on the realistic side as well. But I would encourage you to take this out, open up your computer, your tablet, whatever, and have it available, because I'm going to be talking about certain pages, and it would help you out considerably to understand it if you have the page in front of you. So I would just ask you to do that. If you don't have that, you can let James or Ross know, or myself, and I'll send it to you, but it will have to be after we're done here today. So Ross is going to be putting up the page numbers here, so you will be able to follow along a little bit. For those of you who have very good eyesight, you can pick it up a little. I want to just open up in prayer, if you don't mind. Father, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for guiding over these last years. And thank you for the privilege of being together here with like-minded people. And I just ask that you give us your wisdom and your clarity right now. In your name I pray. Amen. It was shared earlier by one of our speakers, Gary, who has this disease, and he says that there is a possibility that he's not going to be here for very long. And I would like you to know that when I go to speak in churches in the States, I like to tell people that everyone is terminal. You know, it just makes people real happy to realize that you are mortal and you don't know your future and you don't know what it's going to hold. But if you are able to at least think about that and realize that, it can help you put things into perspective. I have finished, quote unquote, my studies on global Christianity and world evangelization through Gordon Conwell. And my thesis work is entitled A Light to All Nations, Assessing the Missional Strength and Commitment of International Churches in Europe. After these, it's been 5 years now, after these years, I am more and more convinced that international churches are a tool for today. And the reason I say that is because of what is happening in the world today. If you are aware of globalization, globalization is what the world hates to see around us. Everyone does not like change, or very few people like change. And so people want to put up borders and walls and all sorts of stuff. But I have a secret for you. If you study globalization, you will come to realize there is nothing you can do to stop it. And so you need to look at it as an opportunity that God is putting in front of you. And what can we do to benefit from that? Globalization, I have a bunch of definitions, and they're on pages 15 and 16. Don't go there, Ross. You can stay here. If you want to go there, you can look them up. They're real long. They're complicated. They're written by people who, you know, I understand a sentence every page maybe. But it is a complicated idea about people just moving around for whatever reason, and they're settling in numbers that we have never, ever seen before in the history of mankind. And so this is happening everywhere. The second reason that I am so convinced that international churches are a tool for today is what you are hearing me speak. English. I try to speak English very well. I will admit I have not lived in the United States very long, less than 20 years of my entire life. I've lived in Congo, and I've lived in France. I've lived in France now more than anywhere else. I do speak a brand of English. The English people will say I speak American. And I agree. But I don't know if you realize, but English has become the most global language that there has ever been. And there is a book out by a guy named David Crystal, and he's in the bibliography, which is at the very end of this. You can find it. And he has some facts in there that are absolutely amazing. But by the fact that you speak English, you are part of a very privileged group of people. And in the study of English today, you have first language, you have second language, and then you have foreign language. There are more people speaking English today as a first and second language than ever before, and by far any other language in the world. The second most spoken language is Chinese. But that is only 1 billion point something people. 1.1 actually. Don't mean to correct you, but I will. Okay. It is fascinating that English is spoken by 1.5 billion people around the world today. That is a huge number. It means that 1 out of 4 people, at least in the world, can understand you no matter where you go. That has never happened before. There have been languages that have been spoken, but not to that extent. And there are multiple reasons why. The first being that Britain was a colonial power that extended itself beyond its borders tremendously. So by the end of the 19th century, their influence was around the world, and we know that the sun never set on the British Empire. Thank you very much. That is true. English is not a global language because of Great Britain. They're part of it. English is actually a global language because of one of their former colonies, the United States. But let me explain that. In 1950 is when English began to become recognized as the official global language of the world. 1950, right after World War II, and it was because of the military strength of the United States. The United States came out of World War II as really the main power. And then as the years went along, it wasn't the military that took over, it was the economy and the social structure and the entertainment and all the other things along with that. And the military, yes, is still part of that, but it's everything else that took over. And then we had something known as the World Wide Web that came in and has influenced the English language like no other language. English became the language of the web. And because of that, people can influence the English language like no other language as well. And that is something that English has that no other language has adopted. The French, in fact, are very proud of their language. Et avec raison. Ah, mais oui. We have reason to be proud of our language. Okay, I'm speaking as a Frenchman. I'm really not. I was refused French nationality, but that's another story. The French have a whole department to promote their own language, to protect their language. The English, the Americans, the Indians, the Canadians, the Australians said, have at it. And so the language has changed, and everyone has been able to change that. In fact, today, there are more people who speak English who did not grow up with English than who grew up with English. And that is an amazing figure. And so, those are the two reasons that I say today is a day for international churches. It really is. We have globalization, people moving around the world, everywhere, and English is being spoken. And I want to emphasize that it's English, it's not American, it's not the Queen's English, it's just English. And you have to be a little bit adaptable with that. Now, for those of you who might remember when I spoke a couple years back, I gave a bunch of facts and figures about different things. And I mentioned that in today's world today, in global Christianity, there are now approximately 42,000 denominations around the world. 42,000 denominations around the world. Now, I have a question for you. How many churches are there around the world? Just hear some numbers. Who said one? You are right. There is one church around the world. There's one church around the world. It's the Church of Jesus Christ. And so many times we forget that. I didn't ask for how many congregations because there are approximately 5 million and et cetera congregations around the world. But there is one church, and that's what the Bible tells us. And you know, we get very excited about complaining about other people's churches or congregations because we want to make sure that everyone knows how good our congregation is. And what does the Bible say? The church is the bride of Christ. And if we continue to complain about and argue about the bride of Christ, someday we're going to have to deal with the groom. And we need to be aware of that. And I'm not saying that to justify that we should open our everything to everyone. But we do need to have an open heart. We need to major on the majors and minor on the minors. And in everything, charity. So, it's easy to say bad things about other churches, but let's watch out. I want to go now to page number 6 on here. And if you have your PDF open before you, you can actually stop on page the contents, the table of contents, first of all, which is just before this. The thesis work itself is laid out in a typical D-Min thesis layout. So you have a problem on chapter 1. 2, you have a theological framework, which I really appreciated when Ronnie said we have forgotten about hell, or something to that extent, because one of the last points that I put in that is that we need to remember that. That has to keep us going. And unity, and you can read that, and then chapter 3 is literature, 4 is the project design, and then 5 is the outcomes. And we're going to spend most of our time talking about the outcomes, but I did want us to start by the page of acknowledgments. I'm deeply grateful to my mission, Reach Global, for having lifelong learning as part of their values. They read about my project and encouraged me to proceed with my studies. When my wife became ill and I needed to stop my studies, they did not push me, but let me take care of the most important issue in my life, my wife's health. I'm also grateful to 2 international church groups that are in Europe. The first of these is the International Christian Community of Eurasia, ICC Eurasia. This group was the brainchild of Colonel Dan Painter, and it was my pleasure to be asked to help in the launching of this group. Today, this group is led by the Euro team, of which I'm still a member. I am grateful to the Euro team who has been encouraging me along the way and has been enthused about my thesis project, realizing the importance it could have for the future of ICC Eurasia and other international churches. Thank you to Dan, James, Mike, Steve, Mike, and other ICC Eurasia affiliated pastors. And a little parentheses here. I was also told last night by Nancy that I didn't get quite of my all of my figures correct in there. That's the way it is. But I do want to say that we should also be thankful for people like John Waldrop, who put the thing out there and told Dan, why don't we have an evangelical group? And I don't know, John, if you realize that you are actually responsible for all this. So, yeah, so just take it. You have big shoulders, so appreciate that. So, I'm also grateful to a group called the AICEME, the Association of International Churches of Europe and the Middle East, who welcomed me into their annual conference, and for all those who filled out my international church survey. And then thank you to Ross, Emily, Matthew, Dennis, Scott, Carrie, Doug, Jody, Murray, and so many others. May our friendship continue. And I will say, since we are in this group, and please, only in this group, I do not agree with a lot of their theology, but I had a lot of fun with them. And getting together, they need a lot of the same things that we do. They need encouragement. They need friendship. They need someone to stand beside them. They invited me in, and Kathy and I went there, and it was a different type of retreat than what this is. They basically meet together for a half hour of devotional in the morning, and then they're off visiting something. And all day long, for a whole week, you're doing that. And it's tiring. They like it. Some of their people have been at our group, and they go, wow, you guys work. I guess James, he needs to go see the other side. He might appreciate a little bit more of the letting go. Sorry, James. Okay. Go to the next page. The next page is called the abstract. And the abstract is a special thing that you have to write. It has to be under 200 words because when you're doing these doctoral studies, you have to put this up on the web so that people can, just click on it and get a synopsis, really, of, well, actually, they call it an abstract, which I guess is why it's titled the abstract. The purpose of this project was to show that international churches, specifically in Europe, but applicable around the world, could be a valuable asset in the fulfilling of the Great Commission, and that they should no longer be seen as country club type churches only for expatriates. Do you understand that phrase? Why did I put that on there? Yeah, it's important. Why? Okay, that's true. Some people do. Do you know why? They were all American. They were wealthy. Some played golf. Golf? I didn't hear you. Connections? That's exactly right, Robin. That is kind of how some of them started. And you need to understand, when I came into this world, it was a long time ago. In the 50s, it was still largely right after World War II, and international churches kind of developed to take care of the soldiers who were overseas, and they led a different life, and they were secluded. And so when I grew up in Africa as a missionary kid, you kind of heard about these churches, but it was like this, stay away. But that's not the way it is. That's not the way it is anymore. And I wanted to put that out there so that people would just see that right from the very beginning. This thesis project includes an in-depth study of all the literature dealing with international churches. Really is all the literature. It took me at least 2 full years doing nothing but the literature review. And that's also the time when Kathy got sick. So, I had to read stuff several times to understand it. But absolutely draining, except for the fact that there really isn't a whole lot of literature. If you look at it, you go, is that really all there is? But um, it also included in the survey is a survey that was created and distributed to international church pastors, which deals with the main difficulties and challenges facing international churches. A secondary finding of this thesis project is that the researcher was able to more fully define what an international church really is and what makes it different from other churches. The researcher also distinguishes the difference between international churches and multicultural, multi-ethnic churches. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later because I know there's some confusion in this room about that. And not now that I know the answer, I'm just gonna tell you, and you can accept it or be wrong. I hope you realize I have a little smile when I'm saying those things, okay? But you really would be wrong. In the appendix of this thesis project, one will find several listings of international church groups. It is the desire of the researcher that all of these different groups that are involved with international church ministry in Europe will come together at some time in the near future to create one complete database accurately indicating the locations of international churches. One of my mentors at Gordon Conwell was a guy named Doug Birdsall. Doug Birdsall was the head of the Lausanne movement for years. And he just retired back in 2010, I think it was. But he is still well connected. And I've talked to him about this, and he's willing to help me out. And the idea that I would really like is I would like the international church groups in Europe specifically to get together to create a database. Not to say that we all have to agree with each other, because we can't. We're humans, and we're sinful people. But if we could at least get together and have this one database, it would help out our people tremendously. Because the people that go to our churches are not usually there for a very long amount of time. But, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years max, and they're gone, and usually to another assignment. Because they'll do that a couple of times before they get sent back to wherever they come from. And if we could at least help them out and say, we know of where the other churches are. Already, I will say that Steve Henderson has probably the best database that I have seen. Done a tremendous job on that, and I do appreciate that very much. So those are the main things from there. Now let's look at the outcomes, which is on page 148. 148 of your thesis. So if you want to turn there, go ahead. And if you don't want to turn there, that's up to you. But we're not going to start at 148. We're actually going to start at page 201. Because starting at 148, starting at page 148 are the conclusions of my survey. And so the survey was 20 questions, and I go through and I show the conclusions of every question. And so that's from page 148 to page 201. And you have to do that because, that's what the research was on. But now I just want to deal with conclusions. And I'm just going to go through these relatively fast because I'm just going to give you the broad conclusions. And then if you have questions, I would just like to open up the floor and let you ask whatever you jolly well would like to ask, provided it's on the subject. You can't ask other things. You can, but... So, 201. On the bottom, yeah. On the bottom, it's 194. And the reason is because everything before the table of contents you can't number. You have to use Roman numerals, and so they don't count on the official. So what I say in here, starting on page 201, is that I have 4 main conclusions that came out of my research. 4 main conclusions coming out of my research. On page 201, I say that international churches must consciously push to become more like launching pad churches rather than being oasis-style churches. And I don't know if you grasp that idea just from the words, but the idea is you have this continuum, and every single church in the world is on this continuum, from an oasis to a launching pad. And the oasis means you come there and you live and you are safe and you are fed and everything is fine. You just don't leave. The launching pad is you're over here and you get launched. Okay, so the idea is every church has to come to an understanding of where they are on this continuum, and they have to consciously put themselves somewhere. Now, I do tell you in there, in the conclusions, that there are more churches who see themselves as an oasis-style church. However, there are many of the pastors who say that they want to be a launching pad church because that is the right answer. We are supposed to do that. We are supposed to be involved in mission. When Jesus said, "Go and be my disciples," that still applies. He didn't say except for international churches. And so we have to be on there somewhere. And if the pastors are aware of that, that is the starting point. And I will admit, when we were working along with the Jennas in starting ICCL in Lyon, that idea didn't even cross my mind. What crossed my mind was, what do we have to do to survive this week? And we got beyond that. But still, that whole idea, that concept, we have to involve ourselves on this continuum. We need to consciously push ourselves toward the launching pad style churches. On the next page, 202, I say that churches must be involved locally. They must be involved locally. They can't be a country club off to themselves. Maybe some things that they can do are to share their meeting room with another church that is struggling. And then you have two struggling churches together and you can be surprised what you can do. That also means that it's important for the pastor to learn the local language. It doesn't mean you have to be fluent, but it is very, very helpful for the pastor to learn the local language. And you can go back and you read all about that in my findings. There is a danger. There is a danger to pastors coming from the United States and elsewhere to be international church pastors because of English. Because they go, I don't need the local language to minister. Well, the problem is they get so busy then, they don't take the time to learn the local language, and then the local people look at that and say, we have no idea what they're doing. And if you are wanting to influence your local society, the local people around you, you have to show them that you care. You have to have that compassion. And part of that compassion is making mistakes verbally. I once preached a whole sermon on you must drink moonshine every day. L'eau de vie. You have to have l'eau de vie every day. And I said this the whole sermon, and all these French people are just getting bigger and bigger smiles. I'm going, living water. What's wrong with living water? De. You don't use the de. L'eau vive. Okay. I learned it. But you got to do it. You got to do it. On page 203, I say that my third main suggestion is that we need to have diverse church leadership. Diverse church leadership. And there are several things that go into this. And one of them, probably the main one, is you need to be careful not to be too American. Now I'm speaking mostly to Americans here. That is what my passport is. Even though my birth certificate is not valid, I do have a valid passport from the United States. Americans can take over. And even if they are in minority, they can take over. Look at your congregation. Look at how they are, who they are made up of, and see if you can get leadership that reflects that. It might not be possible because one of the biggest issues, the biggest hardships that came out from the survey is, how do you get good leaders? And there were basically 2 churches out of the 43 that sent responses that had something going on. And that tells you something. Okay, that says that most of us aren't even thinking about how we train up our leaders. But if you can get non-American leaders in your church leadership, that would be great. Another thing to do that is to see if you can hire, if you are a church that's a little bigger, and you can hire a non-American or bring on a non-American. Thank you. Thank you, Istanbul. What a great testimony. And for the rest of you who are doing that, for the South Africans, there, yeah, go Springboks. Yeah. The 4th recommendation that I came up with is that, if possible, pastors should stay longer in their churches than they might normally consider. And the reason I say that is because the people in your church are there for 2 to 3 years. And every year you have about half of your people leaving. And if they're leaving, they need something that is solid, that remains. And what that is the pastor. And you know, it was true in Lyon when Mike and Karen and Kathy and I were there, and we'd been there 7 years. It was amazing the number of people that went through, but they would come to us and say, "Oh, you're still here." And we left, and I feel kind of guilty because Mike and Karen, we still left them there. But sorry about that. But I do actually give a number that I say that you should stay for this amount of time. And I do have it listed there, and I'm not, 7 to 10 years. Very good, okay. That's what I say, 7 to 10 years. In the States, that's probably considered about normal right now. Overseas, that's considered long-term. But if you can do that, you will benefit your church. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about are secondary issues that came out, secondary findings that came out of my survey. The first of these is found in page 204, and that is that there's really not much literature. Really, if you go to chapter 3, you will see all of the literature that's listed and even more, because I got some stuff kicked out to me by the university library that had really very little to do with international churches, but I had to write on it anyway. But you can look in chapter 3 and you can see everything that's there. Part of my goal in doing this thesis was to make it available to go around the world. I don't want to write a book. I really am not into that. But, if people can benefit from this thesis, wonderful. The only thing I ask is that it might be better to wait until I get my fully completed formatted copy before you send this one out. This one was finished, in fact, it has the date on there, September, I think it was. Yeah, September of this last year, and it's having its final formatting check. I don't know how different it's going to end up. This will be relatively accurate, but just to be on the safe side, it might be better to wait until get the final issue. If you never get it, go ahead and use it. I don't really care because the bibliography will be great. My findings still will hold up. This has all been approved, by the way, so it's all okay. I'm just saying that if you're going to use it for academic purposes, you would want to have the officially formatted copy. The second thing, the secondary issue, and I want you to turn there, and that's on page 204. And that is the definition, bottom, yeah, go ahead and bring this to the top. Okay, the definition of an international church. And I want to read this to you because this is the definition of an international church. An international church is a church where at least half of the congregation does not live in their passport country. Period. So that's the main thing. That's the main thing. So you need to look at your church and you can tell whether or not you're international or not. And don't worry about it, okay? The idea is we need these general terms out there so people kind of have an idea of where you fit. But if you're flirting with the percentages and all that, no, it's not really that important. Down here now are the characteristics of an international church, what makes them different from other churches around the world. An international church can be found anywhere in the world. That is different from any other church, okay? It specializes in ministry to people who are not living in their passport country for a variety of reasons. And that means economic, political, everything. International churches use the lingua franca of the world as the language of communication, which in today's world is English. They may offer translation into the local language or other languages found in the congregation, but English will always be used. International churches are often different characteristically from local churches because of their congregation's greater diversity nationally, theologically, denominationally, economically, educationally, and linguistically. Okay, do you understand all that? Do you see that in your local churches? It is true. Because of these characteristics, demographically, international churches tend to have younger and more highly transitional congregations than the other churches around them. Any questions? Yeah, Rich.
So, go back to your definition of multicultural then.
Okay, we're doing that one next.
Okay.
Good question. Good question.
When you say English only, what if Germans want to start international churches?
Exactly, or Russians in America with other Russians coming in.
They can, as long as they're fitting the top. As long as they're fitting the top, where at least half of the congregation does not live in their passport country. Because that's the real definition. This just fits the global definition of what the international church is. Just like the book of Proverbs is true, but just because I tell you train up a child in the way he should go, he's, you know.
Say that's descriptive, not prescriptive.
If that's how you want to say that.
What's there.
Yeah.
What's there.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Yeah.
Why the expression passport country versus citizenship?
That could change actually, but the idea is that it's relatively soon, and so they might become citizens, but not necessarily. Okay, just go on down to the next page, the definition of a multicultural church. Yeah, I don't have the little tiny thing on here, so you're just gonna have to find it here. I'll just start reading. The third of these secondary discoveries at the top of the page is that confusion exists between the notion of an international church and a multicultural church. Some authors appeared to use these two phrases interchangeably. Yet there is a real difference between the two. The most common definition given a multicultural church is that no more than 80% of its congregation belongs to the same culture or ethnic group. Okay, so that's really the definition. No more than 80% belongs to the same cultural or ethnic group. That is the definition. So there is a major difference between that and an international church. You can have a whole bunch of foreigners in your church and still not be an international church because of the percentages. You could also be a church to American military personnel and be an international church, but not be a multicultural church. Okay, slight differences. I don't worry about them. It doesn't mean your church is good or bad or anything. It's just according to academic things. That's what they are. Okay. On page further on down, the number of groups of international churches. I talk about this in here. My fourth secondary discovery is the number of different churches, number of different international churches that exist. My surprise came from the fact that I'd never heard of some of these groups until I began my research, and I continued to discover more as my studies progressed. I found 10 different groups of international churches mentioned in some fashion in my research, though they do not always have the same level of commitment to international churches. And actually, Steve did a research on those and basically said, wait a minute, some of these don't even exist. So, yes.
What's the difference between an American church abroad and an international church? So let's say you've got a church not far from a military base, 80% are Americans. It's an American church for all intents and purposes. But according to this definition, that's an international church.
It would be an international church, yeah. It would be classified as that. And that's where I say don't get too upset about it. I wouldn't worry about it too much. Yeah. Yeah. A harder issue to get is there are American churches in London that are international churches, which is kind of an interesting thing to turn your head around. So.
Why would it matter to somebody who's working in the church coming to actually those positions? Why does it matter to a pastor, for example?
To me, it doesn't. There are those who they want to say they have an international church. I had a couple fill out the survey that I had to basically delete because they weren't an international church, because you could tell from the demographics and the first questions that they didn't fit that definition. And that's the definition that the Lausanne Committee actually put out. So, if you turn to the appendix G, you'll see a list of all of these international churches. And so you can look at that. That's on page 230. 230. Go ahead and go there, because after that we're going to go to 231. That makes sense, I think. Yeah. I did learn a few things. Steve.
Hey, Jim,
Yes, Mike.
can I ask a question about these international church groups?
Yeah, that's the question we're on right now.
So, the eighth group you have listed is Acts 29 as one of those. Do they major in international churches? Is that
Steve.
their goal?
Steve is my answer on all these. No,
So would they really fit here?
probably not. The reason they're included here is because they appeared in some of the literature
I see.
as international church workers.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry, may I ask a question? I'm from London, and I'm very curious as to, so you said there's an American international church in London. May I ask what is
There's two, actually. I think it's the American Church of London.
and where is it?
Tottenham
Tottenham Court Road. I think you can actually find them in the appendix because they're part of AICEME. There's two of them there.
One in Tottenham Court Road and one in...
I don't know. Just look in the appendix. It'll be there. Yeah.
There's three of them. There's one in Berlin as well.
Yes, there is.
They're all part of the same.
Yeah, except that one's in Berlin. It's not in London. So it's really just two of them. So, yeah.
There's one in Paris, one in London, and one in Berlin.
Yeah, the question was, what are the ones in London? But, yeah.
Permission of
That's you guys, right? Or was? Yeah.
Oh, it still is for another
Yeah.
year and a half.
Okay.
There's several in Europe, excuse me, several in Asia as well that I don't see listed up there.
Yeah. I.
Yeah,
This is basically Europe.
Europe.
Um, I would really, with the help, the hope of Lausanne, really open this up because when we were in Thailand, Kathy and I went to Thailand, Chiang Mai, for part of my studies, which was absolutely fascinating. We went to an international church in Chiang Mai, and it was just fantastic. Though if you're studying international churches, it probably appeals to you. So I'll admit I'm a little bit, yeah, yes.
According to this definition, like a Russian Orthodox church in Nice, France, would qualify as an international church.
If they're still Russian with Russian passports, if they're French with they have their French passports now. Yeah.
I don't think any French, I mean, there might be some, but I would doubt the French would go to a Russian Orthodox church.
Yeah.
Or
They could.
church would go to a Russian Orthodox,
Yeah, they could call themselves that, and that doesn't bother me.
but they're not on the list.
The whole thing seems to be just too Anglo-centric. I mean, on the one hand, you're talking about international churches by definition of people who have country passports and so on. But still, you have this point about the centrality of the English language. In today's multicultural world, aren't those two approaches mutually contradictory?
Hmm. Interesting. Good point. Yeah, and that's one reason why I say I wouldn't even worry about it. No, the idea is we're here to serve Jesus Christ and to be His light to the nations, and really whoever comes in your door, you welcome. Uh, I mean, you don't stop him and say, "What is your passport?" So.
Sir, you said several times today, well, we spent the last 20 minutes talking about definitions, and several times you said the phrase, I wouldn't worry about it. Let me ask you a question. What is the main goal of a thesis? If you were to explain to a pastor in 1 minute, uh, why you wrote this thesis and what we, especially investors, take out of it. I mean, we're hearing things we're not worried about. One thing I've heard is that it's a launching pad, not, what was it?
Oasis.
That's a good one. Could you please develop, because that's how it works, how in your research, if you did anything on this. So I admit I didn't read the thing totally. I read just 4 or 5 pages. But that's extremely interesting. How do we become a launch pad?
There's a whole segment in the thesis actually on that. So yeah, I agree. What I would say that the purpose of the thesis was to show people that the international church is a very valid tool for today, for helping to reach the world for Jesus Christ, and it should no longer be seen as country club type churches. So that was the purpose, right?
Do you use the church at Antioch as a legitimate biblical template?
I do not, but
Do you think it could be?
yeah, it could be. People call that the first international church. Um,
I know they didn't speak English, but
yeah,
in terms of the path,
the lingua franca of that day was a little different. Yes. Yeah, John.
Underscore just that reason alone is valid enough for that thesis to validate for somebody from a academic research point of view to underscore the validity of what the international church is doing. We're not better than the national
Yeah.
That thesis validates what we're doing.
Yeah, and I guess trying to justify the fact that it's a little Anglo-centric, I'm guilty. That's what I am. Um, the American perspective carries a huge amount of weight in the world today, and I think we have to be aware of that. And I try to, in several places, I try to speak how to control that, trying to be careful, especially when you come to holidays and sermon illustrations and you know, not everyone loves American football or even knows what it is, or or the celebration known as the 4th of July. You know, we have a 4th of July in France. It comes between the 3rd and the 5th. But, you know, that's the way it is. Did someone else have a question? Arm up? Yes.
I miss some international churches who are in countries who are persecuted Christians. So these churches are some of the few who are legally because they
Hmm.
Christians from other countries they are more allowed to meet, and so they can invite legally or less legally the inhabitants as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I have one of the reviews is from a guy who did his doctorate on the Rabat International Church. Uh, very fascinating. Very fascinating. Very quickly, just before we end, just scroll on down to the bibliography. I want to just point out a couple of books for you to be aware of if you're going to be purchasing these books, which I'm sure you're going to. Dan Bowers, How to Be Globalization and the Missionary Potential of International Churches, EMQ Online, okay? And then underneath that, his dissertation, International Churches as Launching Pads for Missions to Indigenous Peoples, and that's online. The book right underneath that, Douglas Brower, he just retired from his church in Germany. He wrote a book that just came out last year, How to Become a Multicultural Church. He's one who kind of mixes up the international church and the multicultural church in his own book. I don't think he realizes it, but he does. But it's got some really good ideas on there on how to become a multicultural church. And I think we need to look at that as Americans because of the fact that we are in the culture that basically dominates the world. We need to do what we can to not do that. We need to emphasize the others around us. So those two there, and then down to the P's, Peterson, David Peterson, Expatriate Ministry Inside the Church of Outsiders from Seoul, Korea. A very hard thing to find. I don't know if you'll find it, but if you can, it's worth a read as well. And then there's other one on there. I have some other colleagues, Craig Ott and Gene Wilson, who wrote a book on church planting. That's an excellent book on church planting, and it has like 4 pages on the international church, but it's like 300 and 400 pages, so you might not want to go through that. But in the W's, Jack Wald, A Guide to International Church Ministry, Pastoring a Parade. And that's what he calls it because people are always coming through. They're always going. They're always moving. And so those books are, and that's a Kindle book. And so you can pick that up even yet this afternoon. So any other questions? Yes.
Are you aware of anybody else that is going to extend this?
I do not know. I do not know.
Well, just a suggestion, because I'm imagining they might find you if they are.
Yeah.
You know, connecting this with the cultural intelligence construct, I think would be a great way of addressing that need for the pastors and the leadership team to become more adept at navigating the multicultural context. And so, and that's a well-developed field in academic arenas already. So it would provide a real good lit theoretical
James, are you noting that down? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
I had a thought about 2 years ago that the 21st century language of Pentecost will be English, and that people will come into international churches, and from there they will go back and spread the gospel in their languages. And so I've been very encouraged to read and to hear what you said today. It's been very vital for me. But then one question, the Assemblies of God have got almost a strategy where they will plant an international church and then expect it to become a local church with the language and then appoint a local pastor after a specific period of time. What do you
Yeah.
think of that thought?
I didn't even broach it. Um, the Assemblies of God are wonderful Christians. I don't follow a lot of their teachings. They are much like the Southern Baptists. I hope there's no Southern Baptists here. I'm going to step on either. But both of them are so large, they tend to do stuff on their own, and they don't look for anyone else to help them. And I have found that to be true in the French churches that I've worked in, as well as international churches. So.
We have an example we'll hear from field updates later, but of the Moscow Bible Church that started off mostly as an expatriate church has turned into a full Russian church and has launched several things. I mean, you can get hands-on testimony from Oleg, Alexei, and Constantine.
There's no problem with that. I think a church can change as they develop, as they mature. It's real interesting as you go through the book of Revelation. 4 times, people from every nation and tribe and language and tongue, and that's what heaven is. And really, to me, that's what the international church is. And if we're going to be doing that, worshiping like that in heaven, we need to practice down here. And that's what I tell my churches in the States, and they just kind of look at me like I'm from France or something. But anyway, thank you.
So when I was